Hello class, welcome to another lesson. Today our learning goal is I can factor an algebraic expression by grouping. And we'll talk about what that is as we go along. So, this is an example of a problem that we've done previously, where we have in the first term right here, the first term is right here, and the second term is right here. And the factors of the first term are 2, that's the first factor, and the second factor is this binomial right here, 4x to the third plus 3. In the second term, the factors are negative 9, x, and the third factor of this term is 4x cubed plus 3. Again, the common factor they have is the binomial, so we can factor out the binomial. And that gets us 4x to the third plus 3. 2 minus 9x. And we take a look at both of these binomials. There's nothing we can factor out of this binomial. There's nothing we can factor out of this binomial. And we are done. Okay. This is a review of what we did last time. And this prepares us for what we're going to be learning today called factoring by grouping. So take a look at this expression right here. 8xm plus 4xp plus 10ym plus 5yp. Now, this has 4 terms here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the question that we have is, how can we make this expression look like the ones that we did the other day, where we have a binomial inside a term? One way we can do this is by something called grouping, factor by grouping. So, what we do is we take these 2 terms right here, and then these 2 terms right here, and group them, like this. Okay? Remember, in addition, it doesn't really matter what addition you do first. 3 plus 4 plus 5 is going to be the same thing as 5 plus 4 plus 3, and so forth and so on. So it doesn't really matter which one we do first. So we group these first 2 terms, and then we factor out from that binomial, this binomial right here that we've created, any common factors. Well, here, 8xm and 4xp, we can factor out a 4 and we can factor out an x, and that gets us to m plus p. When we take a look at this other binomial, we keep the addition sign in between them. Okay, bring down the addition sign. Here we can factor out a 5y, and that leaves us with 10 divided by 5 is 2. We're left with m, so 2m plus 5 divided by 5 is 1, y divided by y is y, we're left with p, 2m plus p. Now we're left with something that looks very similar to what we worked with yesterday, or the other day. We now have 2 terms right here, 1, 2, and they have a common factor of the binomial. And so now we can factor out that binomial. Here we have 2m plus p as a binomial that we can factor out, and 4x plus 5y. Okay. We have now taken a polynomial of 4 terms and used factoring by grouping to factor it completely. We now have 2 factors, 1 and 2. Both of them are binomials. So let's take a look at the next one. Here we have something, again, 4 terms right here. We're going to factor this by grouping. And here, as opposed to the last one, we have subtraction. Okay. Subtraction is something that we can't do one way and the other, so because 5 minus 3 is not the same thing as 3 minus 5. So we're going to change this to addition of the opposite. 1 plus 2t plus negative k plus negative 2kt. Now we can start grouping them into 2 groups of binomials. So I'm going to group it right here and group it right here. Well, there's not much that we can take out of 1 plus 2t, but we can take out a 1. We can always factor out a 1. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense to, because you don't really need to. But here, because we're using factoring by grouping, we can take out a 1. That gives us 1 plus 2t. And yes, this is going to be the exact same thing as 1 plus 2t because anytime we multiply or divide something by 1, we get the same thing back. Over here, we can take out a negative 1. A negative 1k, in fact. So when we take out a negative 1k, which is just simply negative k, or negative 1k, however you want to write it, what we get is negative k divided by negative k is 1. Negative 2 divided by negative 1 is plus 2. And the k divided by the k gets crossed out. We get ourselves the binomial that we were looking for. Now they have two terms right here. First term is right here. The second term is right here. We can now factor out the binomial. And that gets us 1 plus 2t. That's the binomial that we're factoring out. And what we're left over with after we cross those out is 1 plus negative k. Again, if you don't see anything that you can factor out from the binomial that you've grouped, you can always factor out a 1 and see what happens. Here, luckily for us, is all addition. Why don't you hit pause on your video and try this one out on your own. Here I'm going to group these first two terms and then these two terms right there. And from this binomial that we've created right here, we can factor out a 3t. So we have 3t 2x plus 1. From this one right here, we can factor out a 6. And when we factor out a 6, we get 2x plus 1. Again, we get the same binomial each time. We have two terms, 1, 2. Once we do that, we factor out the binomial, which gets us factored out 2x plus 1. Then we have our second binomial, which we get from crossing out and taking out that factor. We get 3t plus 6. And here's where the tricky part comes in. Again, we have to look and see if each binomial can be factored further. This cannot, except for 1, which we don't really need in this case. But here we can factor out a 3. So therefore, we're going to factor out that 3. And that gets us 3. We get 2x plus 1. And now that we factor in the 3, all that we're left with is t plus 2. Be sure to always, when looking at a polynomial that's already been factored, see if we can factor it again. Let's try this one out. Again, we're going to factor out, we're going to do this and change this to addition of the opposite. Actually, I'm going to rewrite that so we have the addition of the opposite. We got 72 plus negative 9a plus 2ab plus negative 16b. And we're going to group this right here. We can factor out a 9 or negative 9. Here, because this is a leading coefficient of negative 9, we're going to factor out negative 9. So we get negative 9, and what we're left with is negative 8 plus a. Over here, we can factor out a 2 or a negative 2, and b. A 2 and a b. So we're going to factor out the 2b plus 2b. We're left with a plus negative 8. And notice how these two binomials are actually the exact same thing. They're not actually different in reverse order, but that does not matter. So we can factor those out because those are exactly the same. We get negative 8 plus a. And we're left with, after we've taken out that binomial, we factored it out, with negative 9 plus 2b. Neither one of these binomials have any common factors in between them. Right here and right here, no common factors, so therefore we are done. Sometimes you have to reorder the terms in order to be able to do factoring by grouping. Okay. An example of this is right here. Okay. If I were to try to factor this By grouping, I would be changing this to addition of the opposite. Addition of the opposite, so that'd be 6xy plus negative 3mk plus negative 9my plus 2xk. And then we would do factoring by grouping. We go from there and do factoring by grouping and try doing this, like this, and we would factor a 3 right here. And we get 2xy plus negative mk, or negative 1mk. And then over here, we couldn't really factor anything out. And that's a little bit troublesome. We could factor out a 1, but that doesn't really get us anywhere, or a negative 1, that doesn't really get us anywhere. We're not going to get the binomial that's the same in both terms. So, we're going to try something different. Instead, we're going to move these around, and so that we do have common factors in between them. So I'm going to move this 6xy and put it next to this 2xk. And then I'm going to put this negative 3mk next to this negative 9my. Okay. Now we can try grouping and see if this works. Here we can factor out a 2x, which gets us our 3y plus k. And then we keep the addition sign in between, create our factor, create our new term. Over here we can factor out a negative 3. So we do that, we get negative 3 on the outside. We're going to factor out negative 3. I'm going to use black, just for consistency. Negative 3, parentheses. What we're left with after we factor out a negative 3, we can do a 3m, negative 3m. Negative 3m. Once we do that, we are left with k plus 3y. And lo and behold, we have our common binomial. So therefore, we're going to factor that out. We get 3y plus k. And what we're left with afterwards is 2x plus negative 3n. This binomial doesn't have anything in common, and this binomial doesn't have anything in common. So we are done. There are no GCFs to factor out. Try the practice worksheet on your own.